Hello, in today's video I'm going to talk about how to create a Node.js backend with Mongoose and MongoDB using TypeScript. One caveat: if your project will likely use some packages that have not yet implemented TypeScript without type declarations, you should probably avoid this approach. Let's get started. First, create a project directory. Then you can cd into the project and create some subdirectories. Client server. So in a production project, client directory will house your front end, like Angular, and a server will house your Node.js backend. Let's create another file, touch.gitignore. You will want to ignore certain files. I will give you some examples. Node modules. You should ignore them on both front and back end. On the server side, ignore disk directory and its contents, because that's the compiled JavaScript file, and also ignore .env file. This file has your password, secrets. Now let's use the server directory because obviously this tutorial is about backend, so ignore the front end. Let's create subdirectories. We have source code directory, distribution, which is the compiled source code directory. So we have two source code directories. The src is for TypeScript code and dist is for compiled JavaScript code. Once that is done, you can create a .env file. This file, as I mentioned, have your database password, all the secret, and it is being ignored by Git. So someone clone your project will not steal all your secrets. For this tutorial, we're not going to use these because the database is open access on localhost and there's no password. Okay, once that is done, let's create a sample TypeScript file called app.mts and create a directory for MongoDB. The reason we create a directory for MongoDB is that in the production software, you are likely connecting to more than one database, so it's good to have a separate folder for each different database. Say MongoDB, Microsoft SQL, whatever. Let's get into MongoDB database and the directory and create some folders. One is called models, and the other is called routes. So you define models, and off those models you build routes. Okay, we have a few placeholders. Let's get started on this little application. First, npm install all the packages. Express, obviously, MongoDB, Mongoose, cores.env, cookie parser. These packages need to be installed. Now you can install development dependencies. TypeScript. There's Node.js. There's add types, node. These are the type declaration files, add types / package name. Okay, once the development dependencies have been installed, you can start configure a project. First is npm init package.json. You need to add a type argument with the value module. You use the new module system and some custom scripts. Build, compile your source code, and also there's start. You run your project. Node dist app.mts. The entry point is called app. Okay, this m.js, the compiled JavaScript code. And dev start is similar. You use npx tsc-watch. So whenever the source code changes, you will recompile, and use node-mon dist app.m.js. Whenever the source code changes, you recompile it, and then you watch this for the compiled files as well. Use node-mon. So whenever the compiled file changes, you relaunch the app. Okay, that's the configuration. Let's now go to the terminal again and use npx C init. This init has 2 hyphens before it. Now you can configure your tsconfig JSON file. Yeah. ECMAScript 2022, and then you should be able to find this common.js. Let's use Node next standard instead of common.js. Then there should be a option called outdir. This guy, you should change it to the dist directory, not the default root directory. And then source map, it's nice to have source map enabled for debugging purpose. It's optional. Then you go to the end of the file, append another option called include. It tells TypeScript compiler where to find your TypeScript source code. Any files under the directory or subdirectory of this source directory, it's your source code. That's configuration of TypeScript. Now let's build a very simple server. app.mts, the placeholder we just created. It's very easy, no different than the old approach, except the keyword is different. Instead of using require, use import export. Import express from express. Import cookie parser from cookie parser. Import cause from cause. Import .env from .env. Import mongoose from mongoose. Once you import the packages, you can invoke the .env to load your environment variables. In this project, we do not need to. It's just a demo. Connect to MongoDB database. It's fairly straightforward. You just create a connection. So it's an asynchronous file. Const MongoDB connection string is a string. Is equal to, here we can use something very simple. MongoDB localhost. That's all we need. In production, obviously, it will be a template string with some arguments like the secret password from a .env file. This is the tutorial. Async function connect to MongoDB. So there's one argument called a connection string, which is a string. Await mongoose.connect with that connection string argument. If it's successful, use the console log connect to MongoDB database. So you connect to the database. That's a nice thing to do, to print it out of the console. And to invoke this asynchronous call, you need to try and catch. This syntax is used very often in JavaScript and TypeScript. So await, connect to MongoDB, and use MongoDB connection string. If some error happens, console log error connecting to MongoDB, and you log the error message on the console. You can const define a port equals 8000. So let's serve this app real quick. The app will also use some called middleware. So let's implement them now. App const app equals express and app use express JSON. So you can pass this JSON data. App use express, it's called URL encoded, and extended is false. This is for passing a data submitted from HTML form. App use cross-origin resource sharing is very important during development. The cookie parser is for passing cookies. Obviously, if your production application will have authentication and it will use cookies. Now, let's use app get. Create a very simple API. Request response. Response status is 200, success, and we send some message. Hello world. Okay. Now app listen on port, and the callback function is console log. App is listening on port $port. Okay, that's it. Now we can just try it out. Does this thing work? First, let's try npm run build. Let's take a look at the dist directory. It does have this app.m.js file created. Now let's serve the application, see what happens. npm run dev. Okay, this app is listening on port 8000. Let's take a look. Localhost 8000. It does return hello world, so it's working. Okay, now let's open up another terminal, and we want to create some models and routes using this MongoDB package. The whole idea is obviously to use this database, perform some CRUD operations. So let's go to this MongoDB directory, cd source code, and cd MongoDB. They can create a new file. It's under models. It's called student.model.mts. Student.model.mts. It's actually good practice to check if the file location and extension is correct. Make sure it's MTS, the TypeScript file. So it's very simple to create a model. Import mongoose from mongoose, and const student schema equals new mongoose.schema. This constructor takes some data structure design, like names string, school is also a string, and grade is a number. So student object has three properties: name, school, and grade. Const the model is equal to mongoose.model student and student schema, and you need to export the student. The model is now exported. That's your model file. Now we need to go to the terminal again and create another file under the routes. It's called student router. Let's call it student router.mts. So this file is also fairly straightforward. You need to create a few routes like get, post, and update, delete, that kind of stuff. Import express from express, and use const router is equal to express.router. Invoke constructor, and then you can import student model from the file we just created. And remember, the extension is MJS, not MTS. Yeah, the compiled file. You can create one API, get all students. Router, then get student. This is called get students. Yeah, to make this API endpoints informative. Async request response. It has to be async because you reach out to the database to acquire data. And again, use the try catch construct. The MongoDB Mongoose version 7 no longer allows callback functions in your database operations, your queries. So you have to use this async await try catch syntax. Const data equals await student model find empty trajectory. So empty projection. So you'll find everybody. Console log students retrieved. So you got students from database. You send a response. Status is 200 success, and JSON is data. Okay. Now, if something goes wrong, console log error occurred retrieving students. You can just log the error. That's enough. The response error code, everything should be sent back to you automatically. Now, once you've done that, let's create another route. This route will post the students, so it's very similar to get all students. So this is add a student to your database. Router.post. Let's create this add a student to make the URL endpoint more informative. Request, response, arrow function. Again, try and next. Try catch syntax. This time the query is different. It's called student create. That's called const data equals student create. Usually it will return the created data to you. Yeah. Create request body. So usually the API call will have the name, your school, and your age, not age, your grade into that request body. Log a student has been added to database. And response status success. And you can just send the data back. Whatever you created, just send it back to the caller. It's the convention. Yeah. If something goes wrong, console log error creating student. Error creating student. And then you can probably log the error object. Yeah. Here too, you will want to log the error. Error retrieving students. Yeah. This semicolon needs to be inserted here inside the quotation marks. Okay, that's another route. Let's create still another route called get a student. So similar to the first one, router get, but let's just use the ID field. So async request response. So this function just get one student by ID. Okay, try catch. So the function is const data is equal to await student. It's find by ID, and pass just one argument. Request params, because this is URL parameter, and ID. Console log a student is retrieved by ID, and response status is 200 success with the JSON data returned. Now for this catch error, console log error retrieving a student. So now that's the API to retrieve a single student, and you can print out the error message, the error object. So that's 3 routes, and to use these routes is very simple. You just open that app.mts again, source code. You can import the routes, obviously, at the top level. Import router. Oh, did we export the router? We did not. Student router. Okay, we did not export. Okay, export router. So import router from that file as student router. The reason we use as student router is that your application will likely, in production, will likely have a real application will have a lot of routes, yeah, not just a student route. So once you have this guy, you can simply just use this route in your source code. The order does matter. Let's say before this guy, app use / let's call it API. Yeah, it's by convention. Yeah, student router. Okay. Let's test the app. The backend is already served. So every time I save the file, it's being reserved. We can test the API now. Under this root directory, let's create another directory called make directory API test. API test. Under this API test directory, we can create a new file called let's call MongoDB.htdp. So you need to install an extension called REST client. This is the Visual Studio Code extension. Once you install that extension, you can use this MongoDB file to test your API calls. So first, let's define a base URL. So the base URL should be your where the application is served. Add a base URL equal to there's no quotation marks. HTTP localhost and 8000 / API. Okay. Now you can test APIs. Send request. Not send a request. Here it's a get base URL / get students. And you have another request, post request. Post base URL / add student. And this should have some payload. Content type is equal to application JSON. And your payload would be a JSON object name. Let's call her Claire. School. Let's call her Hanson Elementary School. And grade, let's call it grade 5. That's it. Now we can make some API tests to see if the backend is working as intended. Let's first post a student. Okay, it did post successfully. Now let's send a request to get all students. And to get the students we just posted. Let's post another student. Let's call it Kyle. And let's call it Luce Elementary School, also grade 5. Post again. Okay, Kyle's been posted. You'll get all records. It returns an array of 2 objects, the Kyle and Claire. It's working as intended. Now let's test the last API. Okay, get base URL and / let's first get all the children. That's the ID for Claire. You copy this guy and paste it here and see if the get student by ID works. Okay, it works as intended. So everything's working. So that's this little tutorial. Thank you for your time.